The Prince of Wales was the second battleship of the King George V class. For details on the ship's capability, armour and firepower, please see the guide to the King George V class generally. Although the ship was only active for a couple of years, it would see extensive action, which started before it even left the building yard. The ship was laid down in 1937 and was supposed to be called King Edward VIII, but after the king abdicated, it was renamed Prince of Wales. She was launched in 1937 and was fitting out when the Second World War started. In August 1940, she was attacked while still being completed by German aircraft. A bomb fell next to the ship, and the explosion was amplified by the dockyard wall immediately alongside, which caused considerable flooding below the aft 5.25-inch guns on the port side, which would give the ship a 10-degree list. This was not reflective of the ship's actual damage control capabilities, as the compartments had not yet been sealed and the pumping system was not yet in operation. After a spell in dry dock to complete repairs to this damage and install the main armament, the ship was sent out to join the Royal Navy, without some of the routine tests being completed due to the need for capital ships in the war. Initial training exercises revealed some problems with the 14-inch gun turrets, and civilian technicians were kept on board to try and address these issues. However, on the 22nd of May 1941, the ship was ordered to intercept the German battleship Bismarck alongside HMS Hood. As the main gun problems had not yet been fixed, the captain asked the technicians to stay aboard, which they did. This proved vital in the confrontation with the Germans. As the Prince of Wales engaged the Bismarck, they found they could not use the turret-mounted rangefinders due to water coming over the front of the ship, so they had to use the rangefinders on the control tower instead. This was because the ships were the last British battleships designed with the requirement to be able to fire directly forward at minimum elevation, which meant that the very front of the ship had to be kept low. On subsequent designs, the requirement was dropped, which made them much more capable of operating in high sea conditions, as can be seen here on the HMS Vanguard. After the first salvo, the first gun in the forward quadruple turret ceased fire due to a defect, and the rear turret jammed during a turn. Sporadic breakdowns of the other turrets and guns kept occurring, and the technicians on board were vital in fixing these, thus allowing the ship to stay in action. As a result, the Prince of Wales would score some hits on the Bismarck. One ruptured a forward fuel tank, and another flooded a machinery room, and forced the shutdown of two boilers due to slow leaks from the flooded compartments. These would be vital in forcing the ship to return to port due to reduced speed, and leaking oil would be key to finding the Bismarck time and again as it tried to shake off pursuit. After the Hood was destroyed, the German ships turned on Prince of Wales, but despite a direct hit to the bridge, the ship's armour kept it in the fight. Although one of Bismarck's shells dove beneath the armour belt and came to rest near the aft boilers, it was a dud and did not explode. It was later found that due to its long travel distance underwater, if the shell's fuse had been working properly, it would have actually exploded a safe distance away from the ship. Due to these hits, continued turret malfunctions, and the fact the ship was outnumbered 2-1, Prince of Wales disengaged and joined the cruisers Norfolk and Suffolk in shadowing the German ships. Over the next 24 hours, the ship would open fire on the Bismarck twice more, once using purely radar plotting, but by morning the forward quadruple turret had jammed yet again, and with Bismarck having vanished, the Prince of Wales headed for Iceland, and would take no further part in the action against the German battleship. After repairs, the ship would take Winston Churchill to America in 1941 for the Atlantic Charter Conference, before heading back by the end of the month. In September, she was assigned to Force H in the Mediterranean alongside the battleship Rodney, and escorted the supply convoy to Malta, codenamed Operation Halberd. A number of Italian aircraft attacked, and some would be shot down by the 5.25-inch guns. Reports of the Italian fleet approaching were received, and the battleships moved to intercept, but no battle resulted. The convoy reached Malta, and the ships returned to Gibraltar before the Prince of Wales was recalled to Scapa Flow. The ship would begin its last voyage in October 1941. Due to the impact of the Bismarck, which had required the attention of 5 battleships, a battlecruiser, 2 aircraft carriers, and innumerable cruisers and destroyers to bring down, and due to the fact that Tirpitz was tying down a similar amount of resources in case it tried a similar voyage into the Atlantic, it was felt that although the Royal Navy was largely engaged against the Germans and Italians, some help could be provided in the Far East, as it seemed like Japan was getting very aggressive. The idea was that a small force of Royal Navy warships could tie down a larger number of Japanese warships who would have to be kept near home just in case the British ships tried something. This would reduce the number of ships the Japanese could use in other operations against other British interests in the area and against the United States. Due to the experience of air attack in the Mediterranean and the role of aircraft in sealing the fate of the Bismarck, the Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser Repulse were sent to Singapore, along with, reportedly, the aircraft carrier Indomitable, to provide fighter cover. However, the Indomitable ran aground a few days later and had to head to port to be repaired, and therefore could not proceed. Instead, the two capital ships made a very public journey to Singapore alone, arriving on the 2nd of December. This proved to be something of a mistake, as it allowed Japanese forces to deploy additional bombers to the area and begin specific training to attack capital ships in open water. 4 days later, Japanese troop convoys were sighted, despite no declaration of war. The next day, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and the day after that, the first air raids on Singapore began. Due to the presence of the effectively unescorted troop convoys, the Prince of Wales and Repulse set sail with 4 destroyers to intercept them, with orders being given to local Royal Air Force units to provide air cover in place of Indomitable's aircraft. The day after they sailed was the 9th of December, and the ships were spotted first by the submarine I-56 and then by Japanese scout aircraft. Unfortunately, this coincided with a report that no Royal Air Force fighter cover would be provided. An offer was made for a small patrol to be sent for daytime cover, but for some reason this was rejected. That could have had a decisive effect on what was to come. Overnight, the ships diverted to investigate reports of a Japanese troop landing with the intent of heading back to base afterwards, but the landings were a diversion. The Japanese aircraft tried a night attack, but bad weather meant they couldn't find the British ships, and so they went home. Interestingly, at one point during the night, a Japanese force of 6 cruisers and a number of destroyers was within 5 miles of the British force, but they both managed to miss each other in the darkness. That battle would have been very interesting, since the Royal Navy had demonstrated an ability to utterly annihilate cruisers at close-range night battles at the Battle of Cape Matapan, but the Japanese ships were trained in night fighting as well and armed with many powerful long-lance torpedoes. After refueling, the aircraft set out again, and by 11 in the morning, the Japanese air attack had begun in earnest. The Prince of Wales' main radar array was not working due to the heat and humidity, and so the ships had minimal warning of the incoming attack. This also had an additional negative impact, as it meant accurate long-range anti-aircraft fire, which had destroyed a number of Italian aircraft in Operation Halberd, was unavailable, and the engagement would therefore be limited to when the enemy aircraft were already pretty much on their attack runs. The first wave of 8 Type 96 bombers arrived and began to bomb the Repulse. Only 1 hit was scored, to minimal effect. The next wave was 17 Type 96 bombers armed with torpedoes and 6 armed with bombs. As they came in, the anti-aircraft batteries opened fire, but these had minimal effect in return. This was for 2 reasons. Firstly, the smaller guns had not been provided with much tracer ammunition, so the pilots had no idea they were under attack by these rapid-fire weapons. This was important because 1 gun did have lots of tracer rounds, and it was very effective at forcing enemy aircraft to break off their attacks. The reason for this is simple. When people see streams of glowing shells coming at them, they tend to try and get out of the way, and this spoils their aim, even if the shells miss, because the enemy pilot can see the danger and will try to avoid it. But since you can't see normal bullets, these rounds don't have any effect unless you actually score a direct hit. The second reason can be attributed to a difference in culture. In the European war, the older tactic of shooting directly at the aircraft with heavier 5.25-inch guns had been replaced with laying down a barrage of fire ahead of them. This was a similar issue to the one with tracer rounds. Pilots would see clouds of shrapnel explode ahead and would try to avoid them, breaking their attack pattern, whereas shots directly at the aircraft tended to be more destructive, but misses flew past so quickly that they didn't have much psychological effect. As the primary goal of the ship is to not get hit rather than to rack up enemy kills, it was felt better to discourage attacks from taking place rather than try to pick off individual targets. But the Japanese pilots had been trained to fly straight through flak barrages like this, and so this covering fire had practically no effect on incoming attackers. Tracer rounds proved to be a very different story, but as we covered, there weren't that many of them around. Even so, the attack was less successful in terms of hits scored than the obsolete Swordfish attack on the Bismarck. The Repulse evaded 7 torpedoes and all the bombs in what was quite frankly a magnificent display of seamanship. The Prince of Wales evaded 7 torpedoes and almost dodged the 8th, but when this struck, that was curtains. The torpedo hit the port side just aft of the rear turret, rupturing bulkheads along the outer propeller shaft and causing significant flooding. However, the propeller shaft was also bent, and with its mounting destroyed, it began to rotate around like a gigantic flail, ripping apart the hull of the ship for a considerable distance before it could be stopped. This understandably caused flooding extensive enough to also short out the electrical system to the rear of the ship, which left the pumps offline. With a huge gash in the side of the ship and no pumps available, Prince of Wales began to list heavily in a very short period of time. Another torpedo attack was launched on the Repulse, which again managed to dodge all incoming torpedoes. However, with Prince of Wales unable to contribute much anti-aircraft fire, with the electrical system down and the 5.25-inch guns and pom-poms either pointing at the water or too high in the sky, the next attack by 17 Type 1 bombers in a pincer manoeuvre finally managed to score hits on the Repulse. Having avoided 19 torpedoes, the ship now took 4 hits, slowed and began to capsize, as unlike her sister Renown, the Repulse had not been refitted with torpedo blisters and internal bulkheads, which were needed on a modern capital ship. Another 6 bombers attacked the crippled Prince of Wales and scored another 3 hits, which would cause further flooding, although the torpedo defence system successfully blocked damage in the areas which it covered that were hit. The ship continued to list to port despite these 3 hits being on the starboard side, which showed where the vast majority of the damage had been done. This was followed by a 1,110-pound bomb hit, which the main deck armour protected the ship's vitals against, but could not stop mass casualties in an aid centre set up above the armour deck. A number of near misses caused further minor leaks, and just after 1 in the afternoon, the order to abandon ship was given. The ship sank at 1:20 in the afternoon, taking 327 men, including the captain and admiral, with her. The destroyers Electra and Vampire moved in to rescue survivors of the Repulse, whilst Express rescued those from Prince of Wales. A total of 840 sailors would be lost, 513 in Repulse and 327 in Prince of Wales. The next day, Japanese Lieutenant Haruki Iki flew to the site of the battle and dropped 2 wreaths of flowers into the sea to honour combatants from both sides who had died in the battle. One would be for fellow members of his Kanoya Air Group, whilst the other was for British sailors whose display of bravery in defence of the ships had gained them the utmost admiration from all the pilots in his squadron. The sinking of the 2 ships would severely weaken the British Eastern Fleet in Singapore, and the Japanese invasion fleet would only be engaged by submarines until the Battle of Endau on the 27th of January 1942. Had these ships survived, it's possible they could have helped turn the tide in the Battle of Singapore by attacking and possibly sinking the invasion fleet. It is currently traditional for every passing Royal Navy ship to perform a remembrance service over the site of the wrecks. Unfortunately, in more recent years, it's been discovered that both of the wrecks have been heavily damaged, if not removed entirely, by illegal salvage operations, and so their status as war graves has been, unfortunately, disregarded by some people who don't recognise the value of these men's sacrifice.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.